On March 6 of 1970, a man named Mack Ray Edwards walked into the San Fernando Valley police station and confessed to taking the lives of 6 young children over the past 17 years. He handed the police a loaded firearm and gave them the whole story. The day before, some would-be victims had escaped his clutches, and he knew that it was only a matter of time before they arrested him, so he turned himself in. While in prison, he would change his victim count from 6 to 18, and there are many disappearances and deaths that he is suspected of, but in court he would only be convicted of 3. This is the case of Mack Ray Edwards. Mack Ray Edwards was born on October 17, 1918, in Montgomery County, Arkansas. There are limited records on his early life up until he moved to Los Angeles in 1941. He was arrested once for vagrancy before spending some time in the Army Corps of Engineers. This is where he would learn to operate heavy machinery, which he would use to get a job once he left the military. 1 year after the end of World War II, Edwards married a woman named Mary Howell. To the public, he presented as a friendly family man. He and his wife adopted 2 kids, and Mack also kept horses, which he would let the kids in the neighborhood ride. No one could possibly know that the man that they let their kids play with and who took them camping had a dark secret. By the 1950s, Edwards was putting the skills he learned in the Army Corps of Engineers to work as a Caltrans employee, building the freeways of California. But unbeknownst to his coworkers and neighbors, Mack Ray Edwards had already started a series of horrific murders. The first occurred on June 20th, 1953. Stella Darlene Nolan was only 8 years old when she crossed paths with the monster. He met her at a flea market in Norwalk. Edwards kidnapped her and took the 8-year-old back to his home in Azusa, where she was assaulted and then strangled. Once he was done, the creature drove her body to a bridge in the Angeles forest and threw her off. The next day, the depraved monster returned to the dump site and was surprised to find that Nolan was still alive despite the drop and being choked. He drew his pocket knife and stabbed her before burying her remains under a freeway embankment in Downey, California, where she would remain for almost 20 years. The next crimes would occur just over 3 years later, on August 6, 1956. Mack Ray Edwards came across 13-year-old Donald Lee Baker and 11-year-old Brenda Jo Howell as they rode their bikes in the San Gabriel Canyon. The creature paid the 13-year-old to lure Howell on a bike ride to get them into a secluded area. As the pair rode their bikes deeper into the canyon, Edwards followed them in his truck. He then separated them so they would not see what he was doing, then slit their throats one at a time. What makes this crime even more depraved is that the young girl was Edwards' sister-in-law. The monster would not be charged with these homicides as the bodies were never recovered, despite him guiding investigators to the location. Thomas Eldon Bowman was an 8-year-old boy who disappeared while on a family hike in Arroyo Cinco Canyon on March 23, 1957, who's suspected to be a victim of Edwards. He had raced ahead of the group to get to the car, but when the family arrived at their vehicle, he was nowhere to be found. Edwards resembled the sketch of the boy's abductor, and supposedly there is a letter he wrote to his wife saying that he had meant to include Bowman in his confession. There was also an equipment yard for Edwards' employer near the canyon, pointing to him as a possible culprit. After taking the lives of at least 3 children, Edwards was dormant for a while, moving to Sylmar with his wife and adopted children. But he could not contain his impulses for long, and on November 26, 1968, he was once again seeking a victim. He broke into a home in Granada Hills, where he knew a 13-year-old girl lived when her parents were not at home. His intended target was gone at the time, and so the creature ended up shooting her 16-year-old brother, Gary Roche. The crime would go unsolved until Edwards confessed in 1970, but this execution did not satisfy the sicko, and a month later he was once again on the prowl. Edwards wanted a more hands-on experience. His next target was a 15-year-old boy named Roger Dale Madison, who was friends with his son. Despite the social connection between Edwards and Madison's family, the monster did not balk when it came to taking the teenager's life. On December 16, 1968, Madison got into an argument with his dad and took off on his motorcycle. Mack lived just a few houses down from the teen and likely watched him leave and saw an opportunity. He later told investigators that he had lured Madison into an orange grove. Among the trees, Edwards proposed they play a game, which involved tying him up. Once Roger was defenseless, the creature pulled out a knife and plunged it into the boy. Once again, he would bury his victim under a freeway, this time in Thousand Oaks. However, despite police searches as recent as 2005, the body was never recovered. It seems that Edwards did not have a strong preference as far as the gender of his victims, as there is a mix of boys and girls. 6 months after the Madison homicide, Edwards would take his last known victim. 13-year-old Donald Allen Todd had been suspended from school on May 16, 1969. He disappeared on his way home and would be found later by 2 children. He had been assaulted and shot with a .22 caliber pistol. The final act of evil occurred on March 5, 1970. In this case, Mack Ray Edwards enlisted the help of a 15-year-old accomplice who would not be named due to his age. Together, the pair kidnapped 3 sisters from their Sylmar home. 12-year-old Valerie, 13-year-old Cindy, and 14-year-old Jan Cohen had been Edwards' neighbors, and he had likely had his eye on them for a while. Edwards forced the girls to write a note to their parents saying that they had run away from home, then took them to a secluded part of the Angeles National Forest. Thankfully, 2 of the girls were able to escape the sick creature and underage accomplice. Knowing that the game was up and that the girls would surely report him for what he had done, Edwards let the last sister go free. The next day, Mack Ray Edwards walked into the San Fernando Valley police station. He confessed to taking the lives of 6 kids and to kidnapping the Cohen sisters. He would claim that the guilt over what he had done was nearly unbearable, preventing him from eating and sleeping. This is obviously nonsense, as he had committed the first homicide 17 years prior and was able to continue working and blending in with his family and friends. Police searched the areas where the creature said he had left the bodies, and 3 were recovered. In court, Edwards proclaimed his guilt, arguing with his lawyer and the judge, who rejected his guilty plea. The trial was delayed by the creature's attempts to take his own life. In one case, he tried to slice open his stomach with a razor, and on another occasion, he tried to overdose on medication. Mack Ray Edwards would complain that the trial was a terrible ordeal to put the victims' families through, and begged for the electric chair. While he did not get his wish to be sent to Old Sparky, on June 5th of 1971 he was sentenced to the gas chamber. He was sent to San Quentin Prison, where he occupied a cell next to Charles Manson. But Mack Ray Edwards would not live to see his execution date. On October 30th of 1971, the creature took his own life in his cell, using an electrical cord to hang himself. While there are only 3 victims that can be proven beyond a doubt, and 6 that are extremely likely based on the confession, there are a handful of other cases that are suspected to be connected to Edwards, and the investigation has continued into the 21st century